Good afternoon or good evening. Depends on what side of the coast you're on. Happy April. Listen, my name is Columbus Batiste, and I am one half of the doctors from the Slave Food Conversation. And this evening, we're happy. Dr. Walsh, how are you?
I'm doing good. It's getting warm here in Connecticut, so I'm very happy.
Very good, very good. It's always sunny in California, always sunny in California. But so our esteemed host is not unable to join us this evening, Danette. But we always talk about, for those of you who are new to our platform, Slave Food Conversations it's a conversation where two African American physicians, myself and Dr. Walsh, where we begin to explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food and the creation of health disparities in the African American community, irrespective of income. We've discovered that eating a whole food plant-based diet, amongst other avenues, is extremely important in urban communities, that it's possible and it's key to eliminating health disparities. And so this week, we're extremely excited about the opportunity here, and we have with us an esteemed host, excuse me, a guest that's coming with us. And so I want to go ahead and take just a few moments to introduce our host this evening. Our special guest is the legendary Dr. Kim Williams. He is the first African-American president of the American College of Cardiology. Recently I had said, I'm so tired of hearing first, but it's such an honor to have him with us. He's currently the James B. Herrick, MD, Professor of Heart Research, Chief of Cardiology at Rush Medical College in Chicago. In his prior administrative work, he's developed the HEART program, helping everyone assess risk today to screen churches and community groups for heart disease and stroke risk, and has been a major advocate for reducing devastating effects of cardiovascular disease within the African American community. So the Slave Food team, we thank all of you for your support. Please continue to share the word about Slave Food Project. And let's get at this. We're going to bring Dr. Williams on the show with us. Dr.
Hi.
Williams, hey.
Good.
I'm well. How are you?
It's been a crazy day, so sorry for the little delay, but you're right there. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, to those of you out there who are listening in, normally we do some of this behind the scenes, and so Dr. Williams has been busy at work, but you haven't met my esteemed colleague. You and I have touched bases and met several times, but Dr. Eric Walsh, this is the Dr. Kim Williams, excuse me.
Good to meet you, Dr. Williams. A strong admirer of your work and legacy, and just glad to have you on tonight.
Well, certainly my pleasure.
Yes. So I understand. I want you to do the meditative release from the stressful day, and take a few moments and just imagine yourself with us around the kitchen table, just having a conversation, no stress whatsoever. But I'm gonna start off by a little background, and then we're gonna kind of jump into a couple of things here. One of my favorite books in the whole entire world that really inspired me after I became a cardiologist. I was already a cardiologist because I was inspired to be so. And when Jim Forrester came out with this book about heart healers, it really was inspiring. And I'll tell you that when I started reading, I always do research when everyone comes on our show, and I started really researching about you. I actually started getting goosebumps and inspired really listening to you. I started listening to your interviews. I started listening to your journey, and just really from an academic standpoint. And so I have to tell you that really it's an honor. It's an honor. It resonates with me because I know what it takes to be a cardiologist, and I understand the challenges. And so for you to even step out in the position where you're in as president to really embrace nutrition, which was not something that was sexy in cardiology when you did it at all, I think is truly awe-inspiring. It really is. So
well, I appreciate that. So first of all, it's a mutual admiration society because I get to watch you in the movies first.
No, sir.
Always such an articulate spokesperson for health. And, there are a handful of folks who do, intervention and then still do prevention at the same time. And it's a small group. And I'm, glad that you do what you do and every day, and it makes a big difference. And the influence that you have in the media is also important as well. So thank you very much.
Oh, appreciate that. Appreciate that. Well, Dr. Walsh is a man of science too as well. And so I want to get in with some tough questions right now and hit you with the
There you
research
go.
stuff.
Absolutely.
Are you ready? You ready for the
Absolutely.
research?
Let's go for it.
All right. So I want you to know it's multiple choice. Who do you choose? Arthur Ashe or Bjorn Borg?
So, can I have a surface?
Nope. It's only you have to answer the question. You have 2 more seconds to answer the question.
Okay. So if it's hard court, I'm going with Arthur Ashe. If it's grass, I'm going to have to go with Bjorn Borg or clay.
Okay. All right. I'm going to say, okay. All right. So I'm going to take Arthur Ashe. Would you said 2 for Borg? So I'm going to take Borg. Borg or McEnroe?
Ooh. So again, if it's grass, I'm going with McEnroe. And clay, definitely Borg.
Okay. All right. All right. So, okay. Sounds like Borg is winning. So I'm going to say, Borg versus Sampras.
The problem is that they're different sports. These different surfaces, they're like different skill sets. And so, Sampras, definitely on grass. He's so much better than all the rest of them. It's not that Bjorn Borg couldn't win on grass, but he was designed for clay.
Gotcha.
But overall, as a player, you're absolutely right. Borg and McEnroe would be better than Sampras, unfortunately. So
okay. Oh, all right. How about Federer? Would you take either of them over Federer?
I'm going to take Fed over all of them.
Okay.
A more complete game.
Absolutely. All right. So, all right. Last question along these lines. This is the toughest.
Okay.
Serena or Federer? Who are you taking in their prime?
Oh, gosh, in the prime. Okay, I'm going to take. If I could take a mix and match. Take Serena's serve, which is averaging 118, 120 miles an hour versus Federer's first serve, which is 114, 113. And then put Federer's game. Then you got but they're both so amazing. I guess you'd have to go with Serena because she's probably the greatest athlete that ever lived when you think about what she's been able to accomplish. And But, if Federer comes back from these injuries and does like he did in 2017 and wins a bunch, then he's going to trump them all. We'll see.
Yeah. I love it. I had no idea about your prowess with sports. And that's the reason why you're in Game Changers. I thought, I thought it was because of your academic achievements, and it's because of your sports. And I understand that you yourself were a tennis. Eric, did you know that he was a tennis pro? That he was a tennis?
That I did not know. No.
Oh my goodness, Brian! Or if you're out there listening, put us up a slide of Dr. Williams. Look at this man, at the shorts. No. Look at the fro. The afro is tailored, and I think it was a beard there too as well. I'm having envy. Yeah. I'm having envy. I don't have anything close to it.
Well, this is all about COVID. I hadn't seen my chin since I was 15 years old. But the N95 wouldn't go over the beard, that, and so I know you shaved as well. So it's such a weird time. So yeah, that was 1978. I actually won the singles and the doubles that's probably my biggest prize money tournament, and unfortunately, I decided to finish medical school instead of going on the pro tour. And my coach was heartbroken, but you know what? Medical school, I wouldn't give up as much as I love tennis. And I just got off the court and a little bit before 5 more conference calls. I as much as I love the sport, and it does British Cardiac or British Medical Journal, 57% decrease in mortality if you're a tennis player.
Wow.
As good as vegan diet is, tennis is probably equal or better. But I'm glad that I didn't, pursue pro tennis full time and give up time of cardiology practice.
Well, we are too. We're extremely honored that you decided to bring your talents to medicine as opposed to the clay and the grass and the hard surface like that. So that's wonderful. So growing up, you grew up inside of. Eric grew up inside of Connecticut and Miami, inside of areas of disparate areas. I grew up in South Central LA. I understand that you grew up in Chicago too, as well, a disparate area. And so you tell us about your experience with that and some of the limitations that were there, because it tells us that zip codes matter. And so when we had Tony Iton on the show a while back, who really kind of pushed this area forward in terms of zip codes matter and disparities that were there, tell us about your experience growing up as it relates to healthcare, food, access, things of that nature.
Well, it really is formative for me. Born on the West Side, but didn't live there very long because we lived in a condemned building, and so we had to move out. And then it happened again on the South Side in the Inglewood neighborhood. We lived in another condemned place, and so we're moving all over the South Side. And I used to be so embarrassed that I went to 8 different grammar schools because we were too poor to pay the rent, and so we ended up getting kicked out every year. And then once I was a tennis pro and I was actually teaching tennis in the public parks, I knew them all. And then I became a cardiologist on the South Side, and I knew every park because I lived in all those neighborhoods. So, there's always something good going on. But what really happened to me to change me from a wallowing inner city, not studying hard kind of kid to somebody interested in medicine actually was the fact that my mom was a smoker. And I hope she's not listening because she starts crying every time she realizes that she gave me 3 different pneumonias by the childhood exposure to cigarette smoke. And it turns out that the second pneumonia, I was admitted to what's now Trinity Hospital, but back then it was South Chicago Hospital. It was actually became famous because that's where Richard Speck killed those nurses about 3 weeks after I was discharged.
Oh, wow.
But during that hospitalization, I realized that there were some grave limitations to the care. Because I had had pneumonia before, I knew that I needed the antibiotics and I needed them on time and they weren't coming. So I would go to the nurses station and they were busy and I would ask for the medicines and they would give them to me. And then I started asking for my roommate's medicines because I knew he was on a schedule as well. And I sort of vowed in that hospital that I was going to become a doctor on the South Side of Chicago and fix that hospital. Well, that's not exactly what I did because going from inner city public schools to University of Chicago, which is on the South Side, and I was, sort of doing South Side practice, but in cardiology and in academics. Now, the funny part is that I did train a guy, Dr. Marlon Everett, who is now chief of cardiology at South Chicago Hospital. So in a way, I did fix that hospital, just a little indirect. But it really got me to see early that there were healthcare disparities. I wouldn't have had those difficulties if I had been in a hospital in a different part of the city. And you're right about that. The statistics are not flattering. Even now, a new NYU last September did an analysis of the country. And at Rush, which is on the West Side, we're always talking about how there's this disparity in life expectancy of 16 years as you go from downtown to 7L stops down right past Rush. Well, guess what? That's not the biggest one in the country. The biggest one is Chicago going the other direction. From Inglewood on the south side to Streeterville on the north side, it's a 30.1 year difference in life expectancy, the largest one in the nation. So we do have a very segregated city. It's not as racist as it used to be in terms of, if I walked into Bridgeport over by White Sox Park and went two blocks in the other direction, I would get beat up because I'm Black. That stuff doesn't happen so much, but we still have the segregation of where people are gathered together racially. And so there's so many things that play out with that, with the structural racism, institutional racism, as you could call it. But I like to call it historical racism. That is the food that we eat, the lack of really wide variety of vegetables that people could get. All of this stuff are things that can be addressed. And unfortunately, with the George Floyd thing and then Black Lives Matter, and with COVID showing an incredibly higher degree of mortality in the inner city community, we're now paying attention to this. And every day I wake up and I see a new publication about structural racism and let's do something about this. And the message that I like to get across is that, yes, for cardiologists, we all know that African Americans have higher. We may not have read all of the data. That is 21% higher cardiovascular mortality if you're Black compared to the white population. And if you extrapolate the numbers, if we could just get the Black rate of heart disease death down to the white rate, which is still high, heart disease would not be number one again. I mean, we all thought that COVID was going to knock it out in 2020. Nah, heart disease is still number one. And so, but it's not just heart, it's hypertension, it's kidney disease. And what I try to tell my majority population, I'm trying to get the minority population to, help themselves and change the diet and start to exercise and improve lifestyle. What I'm telling the majority population is help us, because who is paying with it? If they say that Blacks have a higher rate of chronic kidney disease, hypertension, and the ApoL1 gene, and people go on dialysis, and most of the dialysis centers in the inner city or in the cities are with Black people, and Medicare is paying $86,751 per beneficiary, because you immediately, once you go on dialysis, you get Medicare. Who's paying for that? It's not us. We're too poor. Our community, we're not paying the majority of Medicare taxes. So this is a blight on everyone. That money should be going to roads and bridges and free school for everybody. And instead, because of our diet and our lifestyle, we're spending it on dialysis. Yeah. So I think we got a lot of work to do, but at least I do feel like people are starting to recognize that there are problems. And I think doctors like you and Dr. Walsh have the solutions.
The CDC director actually said something that we've been saying for a long time. She actually came out and said, racism is a threat to public health. And that is a profound thing. We in some of our talks, we show posters from the public health department in Australia, going all the way back to like the early 2000s, where they basically said the same thing in Australia when racism is practiced against the Aboriginal people. So 20 years later, basically, the United States is kind of saying the same thing. And it's no surprise to those who have suffered under it. But I think the majority of the population in our country does not understand the connection between racism's stress and disease.
Great. And it's so important to recognize that. I did miss my 20th in a row Australian Open. That's what I do. I don't know how to take a vacation if it's not tennis or cardiology. But I was fortunate to be able to give my 20th in a row Australia New Zealand Society of Nuclear Medicine Victoria Tasmania chapter lecture, because everything's virtual. So I gave it from my living room. But when I do go there and I'm talking about healthcare, you're absolutely right. The Aboriginal population, the majority population is appalled at the numbers. And it's a pretty good system in terms of what everyone's afraid of here, socialized medicine. 2.5% of everybody's income goes into the Medicare Trust Fund in Australia, and everybody gets taken care of. But the poor Aboriginal population, you strip them of their culture, strip them of their native diet, and start them eating what we call westernized food. That's not very West in Australia, but what we call westernized food. And they develop heart disease at high levels. And so yes, I know that in terms of anthropology, Aborigines are considered Caucasian, but they're parallel with the African population in terms of, Black versus white is very much the same in Australia. And they're working on it. They're recognizing the food deserts and trying to get higher levels of education and health literacy so that people will stop eating the things that are giving them more diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. I hope we do it.
Yeah, we have to. I was reading on you, and I did stumble on the fact that, did you save someone's life at the Australian Open several years ago? Someone passed out in front of you?
Yeah, this was a situation where a guy had a cardiac arrest right in the stands. He was feeling badly, and he felt like he was going to go down, and he tried to, he was in one of the better sections of, let's say, and I won't say which company he was with, but he made his way out to the aisle, and then he went down. And so seeing that happened, I got over there. He was pulseless, and within 90 seconds of CPR, he regained a pulse and regained consciousness. And it turns out he's a wonderful guy, and he was just very, very grateful. And so I'm just happy that I happen to be in the stands nearby.
Wow! That's an incredible story. It's an incredible story. So yeah, I mean, it is Minority Health Awareness Month, and that's what we're talking about. For those who are just joining right now, this is Slave Food Conversation with the doctors, and we're joined by Dr. Kim Williams, the past president of the American College of Cardiology, chief of cardiology at Rush University. And we're just talking all things. We've been talking about sports, a little bit about life. And one of the things that we know with Minority Health Awareness Month is, describe to the folks out there listening, what is the risk to a brand new baby? You have kids. I read that you have kids. Do you have any grandkids?
I have nine grandkids.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So for a brand new baby coming into this world who's a minority or African descent, what are their health risks that they're facing throughout their lifetime based upon statistics?
So, I'm so much of a cardiologist, and I have to admit my last OBGYN rotation was 1978. So I don't want to wax knowledgeably about that area, but I have been watching the data. And what I would comment on is the maternal fetal mortality rate of the Black community, which is worse than many third world countries. And here we are in the United States of America, and this is going on still today. And so what are the factors that lead to it? Is it the poverty? Is it the access to prenatal care? Is it the cardiovascular system of the mothers? Because, as above 50%, somewhere around 68% of all adult African Americans have some form of cardiovascular disease. But, they're not really dying necessarily of aortic dissection, but they are getting heart failure and preeclampsia, hypertension. And so, and then once you have that, and you have left ventricular dysfunction, and then the next pregnancy, you're at risk for sudden cardiac death. If you have any impairment, peripartum cardiomyopathy, or impairment of ventricular of the heart function. And so, I think the biggest risk is actually to the mother still, but our fetal mortality is not good, and I think a lot of that still has to do with the lifestyle of the mother and even the grandmother. And, this is something that's been handed down for generations. And, there's wonderful, I think you were actually in that movie, the one that talked about the inner city. I actually wasn't aware of the movie, Invisible Vegan, right? Yeah. And
no, I wasn't in that, but yeah, that's a good one.
No, I've seen you in so many.
No, see, come on, not even close. It was. I think that's a bit of profiling, Dr. Williams. That's a bit of profiling. There was another bald-headed guy.
Oh my goodness. Well, the Cedric the Entertainer. There you go. But Dr. Mills was in it as well. But I didn't actually realize that there was a vegan movie about us. I was lecturing in French Canada, Montreal Veggie Fest. And they said, we want you to come watch this movie. It turns out the movie was about me and my community. And it was very well done. And I recommend it to anybody who isn't vegan, who is African-American. You ought to look at that, because they go through in a very organized fashion from a scientific point of view and a sociological and history of our people, of why it is that someone should be on a plant-based diet.
Yeah. No, that's huge. I know Eric has done a lot of work in public health with maternal issues, and as well as with some disease burden too, as well inside the community. Eric, you want to chime in with your thoughts on that? I think there was a study about breastfeeding, breast milk, and formula here recently, and some of the impact downstream.
Well, there's a couple of things when you look at this part of it. I think what Dr. Williams said is very true. First of all, there's a generational component. What the mother eats, how stressed the mother is. Hormones like cortisol, releasing hormone, and cortisol cross the placenta and actually impact the child, which actually can have a child develop more adipose tissue in utero, more adipose cells before they're even born, which means for the rest of their life, that child is going to struggle with, much more easy for them to struggle with weight problems if that's the case. So that's one interesting part of it. Another interesting part of it is the studies that show that when women come from Africa, the first generation, those who migrate here, their maternal child outcomes, whether it's birth weights, maternal mortality, fetal mortality, it's the same as white women in America. But their daughters, who are born and raised here, have the same numbers as African-American women, which tells you there's literally, when it comes to maternal child health, there's something toxic about America, literally, for Black women.
Wow.
Yeah. That's interesting across the board, because you see that replicated even with hypertension. So, I mean, I think the AHA, it was maybe 2 years ago, kind of repeated the study that was done previously that kind of show as you move from West Africa to the Caribbean to the United States, you see this slow rise, or not slow, this steep rise in hypertensive events. And so you look from a genetic standpoint, probably very similar, as we all are from the human genome. What we learned, we're all the same underneath. And but yet we see this rise in disease burden here inside the States.
Well, that's so interesting, because we do have this predilection for hypertension and nocturnal hypertension that people aren't necessarily aware of. And in my practice, getting the consultants, they'll see my name on the hypertension guidelines. They'll from 2017. They'll send me the tougher cases, and the doctor's using short-acting drugs. But I've got a patient whose blood pressure is not going to dip. And if you're African American obese, your blood pressure is not going to dip. It's the non-dipping is not just urban blacks, it's rural blacks as well. And in Africa, it's urban blacks, but not rural blacks. So it's not necessarily genetic. It has to do with probably the cortisol that Dr. Walsh was talking about. It's the adrenaline levels. And so I wish that everyone knew that, so that they would use the 24-hour acting drugs and just pick out things based on half-life rather than just the immediate response. Take a pill at 8 o'clock in the morning, come to the doctor at 11, and you think blood pressure is controlled. First of all, that's wrong, because our guidelines say do your blood pressures at home. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's worth mentioning, because not everybody saw that new guideline. And we all thought, I was really blessed to be on that hypertension writing group and learn from the 16 other colleagues. I was sort of talking about nutrition and AFib and valvular disease, but they were talking about a lot of the bread and butter hypertension therapy and diagnosis. And one thing I learned, I knew everybody knows about office hypertension. Everyone's heard of white coat hypertension. And so that we have to be careful attributing high blood pressure to people without home blood pressures. What they didn't know is so-called that is MUCH, that is masked uncontrolled hypertension. And if you look at the data, Jackson Wright talks about this all the time. We now have a diagram in the guidelines. Who is getting this? Masked uncontrolled hyper. What does it mean by masked? It means that I've got a 80-year-old lady who's growing up in the Gresham area where I was. Gresham in Chicago has so many shootings now. You can hear the gun battles going on. She's getting under the bed, which is what we all had to do when we heard the guns go off. And then she comes to Rush, and I'm like 45 minutes behind in clinic, and she's sitting in a pleasant, cool environment where everybody's being nice to her. Her blood pressure could literally be 30 millimeters lower in my office than it is at home. So for that reason, both the office hypertension and the masked uncontrolled hypertension, we have to have ambulatory blood pressures before we start, doing meds or changing meds. And I hope that message gets out there. Now, if we get rid of all the structural racism and the people who are, gang banging and shooting each other are actually in school, going to medical school and law school because they have, tuition access programs, that'll change everything. And she doesn't have to be afraid at home. And then maybe our office pressures will be worth something.
Yeah, I think that's so important when you break it down about the impact of our environment on our ability to develop resilience against disease. And when we look at our environment, or whether or not we're speaking about social determinants of health, where we live and work and play and die, what is that confines? And so even as I listen to you, despite awareness and knowledge, and we talk about this frequently on this platform, but about an individual who's living in an environment that's constantly wrought with strife, fear, apprehension, whether or not it's against agencies that are supposed to protect us, or whether or not it's from individuals in the community that are causing despair locally, that the stress levels are higher, their risk and burden of disease is so exponentially higher that, it's one of the things that I think the vegan, and I think I introduced him to you, Eric, and you keep reminding me of his name right now, the farmer guy, Ron
Compton.
Yes.
Yeah.
That there's more. Yeah, we're dying more from drive-bys than we are drive-throughs than we are from drive-bys.
Well, that's a great one.
It is. We are dying more from drive-bys, drive-throughs than we are from drive-bys. And that's really the problem. And it's not our family genes, it's our family recipes. And so when we live in this crucible of conflict, it's no surprise that we're wrought with all these disparities, and we wonder if it's genetic, and it's not genetic. It's our environment.
Can I weigh in on that? Drive-through versus drive-by. That's a wonderful line. It dovetails with a project that, I guess I'm going to go ahead and talk about it because I'm not showing slides, but we did submit it for the ESC and submitted the manuscript last night. But but my granddaughter actually did, and I was saying, look at our 2017 or 2019 ACC/AHA guidelines on nutrition. And then, and 2 years earlier, the Journal of American College of Cardiology, out of the Harvard group, Nurses Health Study and Health Professional Follow-Up, published a healthy versus unhealthy plant-based diet paper. And that one showed exactly that when you take a potato and you fry it, or you take wheat and you remove the kernel and you remove the germ, and you're left with this white stuff that they call white flour, and it may taste really good, but you're going to get that insulin level. You're going to get, it's going to be atherogenic. So refined grains, sugar sweetened beverages, frying foods, all of these things are maybe vegan and may be good for the environment. They may be good for animal rights. They're not good for human health. And they show that the coronary disease rate, if you're consuming those things, is actually worse than eating animals, which was shocking. So what I asked my granddaughter to do as sort of a summer research project was to watch a bunch of television commercials and just write down what she saw. And she actually did take the Sagittal JACC article and do the scoring as well. Then I had a resident, Dr. Ikram, who joined the project and actually did one step further, which is look at what happened during COVID. And it turns out that the marketing changed dramatically. And so she reanalyzed the data based on the frequency of each commercial. And they went away from advertising hotels and airlines to advertising fast foods. And they seem to be targeted. They have more African Americans in these fast food, and we already knew that they were already targeting the African American community. So because of the frequency of restaurants, fast food restaurants in the Black community. So anyway, we did the scoring system, and it was terrible. You know, if you compared fast food, it was first of all, the majority of the food commercials were fast food, followed by grocery stores and home delivery. But the fact of the matter is, and then there were some individual food items. Those three tended to be a little healthier, but it's statistically significantly worse. If you take I'm not going to use I'm going to try really hard not to use a brand name. You know what I'm talking about. You take the bacon and put it on an egg and put it on refined grains and then score that out. That's a -3 right there. There were some franchises where they'd have a commercial for something and it's a -7. And people, it turns out that the commercial marketing changes human behavior. There's such a good literature on that. And so that's part of the problem that we have with COVID is that people are, with the more social isolation you have and the more lockdown you have, they're, happier eating, and they're eating things that make them feel good short term, but it's not going to be a good solution long term. So I'm hoping that the upshot of this is we're going to go out on a limb and ask people to try and get some legislation, get some regulation. We regulate cigarettes. Why don't we regulate unhealthy foods? I mean, I know we're going to get a lot of resistance to doing that, and maybe it'll go nowhere, but we're at least going to ask the question.
I mean, it's important. And you look at the work, I mean, first of all, that's brilliant. And it accentuates a lot of the data that's already out there that folks like Eric in public health have really kind of brought to light in terms of the disproportionate burden of advertisement inside of the youth, as well as those in communities of color, right? And we know the impact, and we know the role in schools to now develop this brand recognition. It's like, okay, you purchase the same type of shoe or whatever it is because you started out purchasing it. And so now you purchase the same type of food substance or soda and everything else, and it carries throughout your life. And that's how they figure that they can hook you. And Michael Moss has done a wonderful job of this, revealing this through Salt, Sugar, and Fat, and even in his new book. And you kind of alluded to this, and I'll give you time to kind of go into, you and Eric to go into a bit more in depth. But he talks about the speed at which these substances reach the brain, determine and dictate the addictive nature. And so, the differences between different forms of cocaine, but saying that sugar actually will reach the brain in under a second. and looking at the level of addictiveness that really results from it, and the fact that it's not just the sugar substance, but it's also the refined grains and breads and things of that nature. Standard American diet, vegan style, is what I always like to joke and say. You know, we have to get away from standard American diet, vegan style, anything else as it pertains to health.
Absolutely. So I know Dr. Walsh wanted to comment on that, but I did look. I think it was one of the Plantrition Project lectures, and Dr. Stoll asked me to talk about sugar, and I was just shocked at what I was able to find about the addictive nature that you just mentioned. The dopamine rise in the brain, and the problem isn't that it goes up. The problem is that it goes down. And when it goes down, people want another one, and that starts a cycle that is very, very hard to break. So, you know, I would say don't drink your calories, stay away from the refined grains and refined sugar. And if you can't, you know, stop at cold turkey without the turkey, then what I say is start diluting it. And, you know, I did sort of, after I read all this, I did wean myself off of fresh orange juice because I'd been thinking that it was good for me. Well, you know, so I started watering it down. Next thing you know, yeah, water's fine.
That's great stuff.
And there's a thing when I did an addiction medicine rotation in one of my residencies, and they talked about something called dysdopaminergic syndrome. That there's some of us who literally the dopamine receptors in the brain are set up so that it's easier for you to actually become addicted. And I wonder sometimes if I think this is partly due to things that related to trauma. If some of the things I remember, you know, early life traumas and stressors, again, going back to stress, so that in a sense, when you live in some of these neighborhoods where you hear guns going off, and I've been in neighborhoods like that, we hear living in Miami is a frightening thing. And then you hear the police helicopters. The whole neighborhood collectively has a cortisol surge. The whole neighborhood collectively has an adrenaline surge. And I believe all of that changes things, because one of the things we talk about a lot on our talks is stressed equals desserts spelled backwards. And all of a sudden, this collective stress makes the honey bun taste better. It makes that sugary Kool-Aid feel and taste better, and on and on and on. So there's another layer to this, different than what a lot of other people have to deal with, because you're trying to manage stress, and anything that you take in your body or that affects your body and changes your mood, you can become addicted to. You know, in terms of a habit forming sense. So then you plant the neighborhood with all the corner stores we used to have, you know, and it's just like it's almost like it's designed to make it so that many of our people are going to get caught in these things and be addicted to foods that literally will kill them. And as the comedian, what's his name again? Dick Gregory used to say, you know, we go to funeral. Black people go to funerals and cry over people and bury people, and then turn around and eat the same food that put them in the grave in the first place.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well
insane. It's absolutely. And I know there's a lot of pushback, or I think there's less now in terms of seeing food as a level of addiction. One of the things that I remember listening to Michael Moss's book that he kind of brought out is he said an addictive quality is something, it's a substance that leads to repetitive behavior that some find difficult to stop. And so when you look at it from that context, that lens, that's less medical, less technical, but just very simply stated, some people will say, I don't have any problem. I can have one soda and never touch one again, or I may have X amount. And then you have others like me that will sit there and eat a whole bag of cookies back when I ate it like that and hide it, you know, in the car. And it's like, okay, that level of self-control isn't quite there. And so you have to understand what really resonates with you as an individual and recognize those factors, I think.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it becomes important. You know, it leads me to kind of think about an email I received from actually a physician colleague who's in Georgia. And I told him I would tell generically this story, and he kind of talked about how he stumbled on Joel Fuhrman's book, Eat to Live, and how he watched a movie, and then he read Ornish's book, and how he basically decided he was going to make a change. And so he's an emergency room physician. His wife is a pediatrician, and he was reaching out just to connect and say hello. And he just said, boy, what do you do when your family isn't on board with you? He's like, my wife has a public health. She's a pediatrician, but what do you do? What advice do you have to give? And so, I want to present you with that question. I of course I gave him my own quips, but what do you do when you're trying to make that journey? People are trying to make that journey to change, but yet the obstacles of all their prior habits are all around them every single day.
It's a real good question. And, I know people have said it over and over again, you have to meet people where they are. Once I heard that, I started taking it very seriously. And I do, it's only a few minutes of kind of intensive interviewing about how people are living their life, what is their surrounding. And I'm going to surprise everybody with what my number one way of getting a person to change. It's a vegan daughter. If you've got a vegan daughter, I got you. Okay, I'm gonna, empower her to take over your health. They're happy to do it. They've been pushing you anyway, and it really does work with a high degree of success. Without the family support, though, it's sometimes very difficult. And so the most difficult patients that I have are the ones who are in a nursing home or a rehab facility. I get no traction with the nutrition people at these places. I've tried sending them literature. I've tried conference calls. There's just no way to get them to change what they do. So for other than those two extremes, there are people who really have to be brought along, and that if I realize that a person isn't going to respond to this right away, or they tell me that they can't do it, then I go ahead and try the as healthy a version as you can of the transition diet. That is, things that Americans eat can you not get as a vegan thing. So cheese, chicken, whatever, you can find a vegan version of it. Sometimes there's too much oil. Sometimes there's too much sodium. And if you can get them to do this transition diet with more healthy choices by reading labels, you can kind of move them in the right direction. So the ones I've struck out on, and if anybody knows how I can get them, it'd be great. It used to be venison, but the last time I looked, there is vegan venison. Armadillo. One of the surgeons at Rush said, I can't do it. I have to have armadillo. And I couldn't find vegan armadillo.
I wonder why.
Exactly. I'm about to say, I don't think you should be able to.
Exactly. So, frog leg, rabbit, and possum. There's no vegan possum that I can find. But with those exceptions, you can pretty much find anything. And it's just the problem with the biggest problem with the transition diet, like I said, is the fat content. Sometimes it's a high saturated fat, particularly there's a lot of coconut oil, which isn't good for the dyslipidemics. I know there are some big coconut oil fans, but in our vegan community, but they have to admit that the effect on LDL cholesterol is not positive, even though it's not as bad as animal longer chain fatty acids. It still is dyslipidemic. So getting them to just get used to the idea that they are eating plants and try to move them along closer to a whole food plant-based diet. And it's just, some people are very gradual. And then there are people who are, that's very determined. They tend to be the more, health literate or the more, health paranoid. Like I personally, and they're very health paranoid. I read something and it changes my behavior like that as soon as I read a randomized trial. And so if you have that person, then you can give them exactly what they need to do and they're going to follow it to the letter. But you got to know who these people are.
Yes.
I think one of the things that you said that kind of is striking to me, and I think some people are talking about it in the chat as well, is I'm shocked sometimes how little the nutritionists actually know. Doctors get beat up. They say, we get only 4 hours, 6 hours of nutrition, depending on the medical school you go to. But man, I talk to nutritionists who still tell you, well, if you don't eat meat, where are you gonna get your protein from? And I guess that's almost more frightening, because if you're in a healthcare system and you send people to the nutritionist, dietitian, and they don't know these things, how it really becomes difficult to move people forward. So just your thoughts on that, actually.
Well, I tell you, I have a lot of thoughts on that. And the last time I shared them, I was giving grand rounds at Washington Huskies, University of Washington in Seattle. And one of the nutritionists or dietitians heard what I said, and she like wanted to ream me. But I was telling the truth. I was at, a few months before that, I was at the Florida Food and Nutrition, they call it FANS, nice name, 500 dietitians, registered dietitians, 3 vegans. So I kind of knew I was in trouble. And, they really, and they did say exactly what you said, Dr. Walsh, where are you going to get your protein? And so I'd heard it over and over again. And so I said what I should say, that is, well, where do you think they should get their protein? And of course, the lady said, steak. And I said, okay, and steak comes from what animal? Cow. And what does the cow eat? There's always a pause. Grass. And so, you can argue that our digestive systems are somehow different and that they can process grass better than we can, and horses process hay, and giraffes process leaves. The fact of the matter is, most mammals, the mammalian physiology is designed to eat plants and absorb protein and all the nutrients from it. And you may have a shorter gut and do okay with animal products if you have, claws and fangs because you're, meant to be a carnivore. But for most of us without those kind of teeth, we do pretty well with plants. But I didn't stop there, and maybe I should have. So the next thing I said was, and when you have a patient with gout, which is purine metabolism gone awry because you're doing protein overload, what do you tell them to avoid? And you say, well, lentils and soybeans. I said, wow. Is that because they have more protein than beef and pork? Which they do. And so then it's, then I try to, and that's done there. Then I try to refer them to the American Dietetic Association webpage that says very clearly that the best way to avoid chronic disease is to do a vegetarian diet. It's in their own organization. Wow. So I try, and the funniest part about this, if I can keep going on this just for a moment, because I'm an inner city doctor, I deal with that APOL1 gene and predilection for Blacks to have chronic kidney disease. There is data out there that is very clear that if you stop eating, that animal protein is toxic to nephrons, and that that gradual progression of CKD doesn't have to happen if you stop eating animal protein and switch to vegetable protein. They've got this data out there. You see everyone talking about plant-based diet for kidney disease, even end-stage renal disease, because your dialysis won't be as long if your BUN and creatinine don't jump high because you're eating this, this animal protein overload. Getting the dietitians who run the dialysis centers and work in nephrology on board it's been impossible for me. So if you have any tips on that, I've started including it in all my talks. I know I'm a cardiologist, but one of the leading causes of cardiovascular disease in the Black community is chronic kidney disease, and so we've got to deal with both organs. And I tried setting up a cardiorenal clinic when I was first in Detroit, and it's because of the co-occurrence of risk factors between the two that we need to be managing both diseases at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, well said. It's such an important topic. I mean, this actually was what led me when I was serving as chief to really bring in my own dietitian into the office. And because I was so dissatisfied with the recommendations that were coming when I sent them to a large pool of dietitians. And so I handpicked one where they, once again, they didn't try and force a circle into a square peg into a circle. What they did was they met the patient, but they set the goal. That listen, you need to move towards plant-based, and it was nice augmenting my conversations I had. But you're both so right. There are so many challenges when it comes to misinformation. I was just speaking with a physician who reached out to me, and you both are probably familiar, know Dr. Katz and so forth. And so he's done work with Diet ID. So they reached out and said, "Hey, I understand that you were curious about Diet ID and you've done some stuff." And he was going into stuff, and I said, well, full disclosure, I said, I'm a whole food plant-based guy. I said, I'm not saying plant-based guy. I said, because I see that with everything. I saw plant-based inside of a Swiffer. And I said, what does that mean? And I said, but I went on to kind of describe, and he was like, I need to learn more. He said, this is a doc. And he set up exercise as a prescription inside of our organization. He said, man, when I'm out with all my sports colleagues, it's all about the keto, all about this, and what they say seems to make sense. And then I go around you guys, and then it seems like if it makes sense for what you're saying. And I said, and here lies the problem. Here lies the problem. I said, just because you get some benefit by removing the standard American diet does not mean that that is the precise direction you need to go. And it depends upon the question that you're being asked and what you're comparing your eating habits to. If you're comparing it to something that's horrific, then yes, you're going to make improvements. And so I think all this education, what you're doing and the publications that you're putting out, you did a wonderful job in addressing barriers and access inside communities of color and so forth. That article that came back, I forget, I think about a year or so ago, and all the other pieces I think are extremely important that many are starting to produce. There was one on community resilience by Dr. Lewis out of Morehouse, and looking at ways in the context and how you can offset disease by building resilience in the community and so forth, and looking at Life Simple 7 from American Heart Association. So,
well, it's fantastic. I know we're getting short on time, but I have one more big thing. If I could,
yes, please
take a tangent from what you were just talking about and how people need to change. We are in the middle of this COVID pandemic, and very early on, we were getting that Blacks and Hispanics were getting more COVID mortality, higher level of illness. And when you run a database, which we did at Rush, but there's several publications, probably the first New England Journal one was out of Oceaner in New Orleans. And the upshot of their analysis and ours was very similar. It's not being Black that makes you die of COVID. It's having the risk factors. And so if you take away if you adjust for the degree of obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol, and even socioeconomic factors, if you adjust for all of that, being Black tends to be a slightly protected, don't know why, but the hazard ratio of 0.89 would mean you're 11% better off. So what's been interesting is to watch the development of COVID science since those first articles came out. And the new one that I would hope everyone follows is about the microbiome. This was published in Gut in January. And we've known about the microbiome in the vegan world and the non-vegan world in Cleveland Clinic because Stan Hazen and his group started talking about the microbiome and the development of trimethylamine N oxide, TMAO, when you eat animal products. You eat the choline, phosphatidylcholine, your gut bacteria change it to this toxic chemical, well, with the help of your liver. And the TMAO, that people are not familiar with it, please write it down, put it in your search engine, and you will be vegan by the time you're done looking at those pictures. Because it is associated with plaque formation, plaque rupture, heart attack, stroke, heart failure, death, and the development of chronic kidney disease. There's one compound. And so we've been focusing on cholesterol saturated fat. That's fine. But TMAO is very important as well, as is inflammation. And it turns out the inflammation that we have in our bloodstream comes from the bacteria. And so when Gut published that severity of COVID illness is depending on the species of the microbiome in your GI tract, and how when you're eating animal products, you have this horrific microbiome that you can clean up in a matter of 4 to 5 and maybe 14 days. You can clean it up if you do a whole food plant-based diet. So, Stan Hazen's group at Cleveland Clinic has taken a vegan and given them a steak, and they don't get a rise that you get in a meat eater of the TMAO level because they don't have the microbiome. Now, if you did it every day for a week, I'm sure you would. The bacteria that are inside the decaying flesh of the corpse that you tried to eat, sorry about that, actually does deteriorate repopulate the bacteria in the GI tract, and that correlates with development of inflammation. I can tell you that in my family, the vegans, we all have low inflammation. We're always wearing extra sweaters because we're colder than everybody else, right? Because there's no inflammation. And with that second COVID vaccine, none of the 50% of my family who was vegan got any symptoms, and the 50% who did, that second shot took them out for some hours or a day or so. So all depending on your microbiome and how much inflammation, how you respond to any kind of antibody induction in terms of inflammation. So I would say that if if it only takes 5 or 10 days to change your microbiome, and we're now in this phase where the 30 to 40-year-olds are the ones being hospitalized. Please hashtag go vegan for COVID. It might be nice to say that way, but I'm hoping that everybody will understand the importance of the microbiome and how it will control what happens to you. There's a whole lot of literature now that's way out of cardiology. It's striking that the microbiome results in everything: Parkinson's disease, degenerative neuro, all kinds of inflammatory disease are controlled by what's in your gut. So we've got a lot of learning to do there, but I would say that until we know all the right science and which probiotic to take, and they are talking about putting poop in a pill, this would be vegan poop. And I think there is a trial going on, FDA approved trial for one of the companies that's putting the probiotics out now. Vegan poop is fairly powerful because it's got the right bacteria that needs to populate your system. But I think, as far as I know, as far as I'm reading, you can do this just by doing a whole food plant-based diet.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Wow. That's powerful and so synergistic with what we've discussed over the past months and so forth. It'll be a year in this coming June since we launched this platform and started really giving these talks. And you really kind of brought everything home in terms of everything we've discussed. Really
and I will say this: I think if people knew they were going to have to take a poop pill or eat a plant-based diet, you might get a lot more people eat plant-based.
That's right.
Right, absolutely.
Oh man! So listen, you've given us such a wealth of information. Leave us with a brief little bit of hope once again about what we can do inside the communities as we round out this show here. That people can do really to build resilience in their community, amongst their family and others. Anything that you would suggest?
Well, so one of the things that has been stalwart in our African-American community is the churches. And so we are working with our churches. It would be nice to see everyone sort of reproduce that. The Association of Black Cardiologists has been doing it for a while. It started 2012 with the Spirit of the Heart program, going into churches and talking about healthy living, but also doing screening for high blood pressure. And then it became screening for high blood pressure and diabetes. And so when I got to Rush, I was doing some of that in Detroit, my so-called urban health initiative. But at Rush, I started what we call, because I got there a few days before the 2013 guidelines were published, saying that you have the ASCVD risk calculator. And it does include Blacks, it does include stroke. It's a very powerful tool. And you can say, hey, Uncle Joe, what was your cholesterol? Now, what was your blood pressure? And how old are you now? And you put all that stuff in your phone, and you can tell them, oh, you have a 17.5% risk of having a cardiac event in the next 10 years. You better see your doctor. And so having that tool and taking it into the community, none of this Framingham, because Framingham did not have enough African Americans. But we have this in the pooled cohort equation. So we started what I call the HEART program. HEART, H-E-A-R-T, stands for Helping Everyone Assess Risk Today. And we go into the church and we do the screening for blood pressure, cholesterol, as well as hemoglobin A1C, and then calculate the risk and tell the people who are at high risk to go and seek care. We took it one step further, and that was to do the screening and then do a vegan intervention, which we did in 2019. And we got people to drop their TMAO level by 43%. They dropped their insulin level by 43%. And everything went in the right direction. LP-little-a. Well, LP-little-a doesn't respond to diet. So they say, well, Baxter Montgomery published one saying it went down 10%. Vegan diet, and that's exactly what we got. It's a 10% drop in 5 weeks. The LDL went down. Everything went in the right direction. It would be nice to be able to pay for people to have 3 vegan meals a day, and have it calorie controlled and sodium controlled and stuff like that, but not really practical. But I'm hoping that everyone in our listening audience will set up some kind of screening, if not screening plus intervention program. And the more we get the word out, we can stop this initial pandemic of heart disease on top of the COVID pandemic, because they both have the same risk factors, and we can knock them both out at the same time.
Love it. Absolutely. I had a vision pre-COVID of replicating the work with the Barbershop Initiative. And instead of it being focused just solely on pharmacology, focusing it on nutrition inside of there, and having that serve as a bulwark to touch people and to reach out. And so I was working with the local AHA chapter for that before COVID hit. So we'll see what happens in the future. But that's wonderful what you've been doing. Wonderful.
Gonna keep at it.
Yes. Eric, any final thoughts as we round the corner?
No, this was awesome. Dr. Williams, a wealth of knowledge and passion, and I think this was great. A great show, and will be, lots of people get on and watch this, and it'll benefit a lot of them.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. You got a link you're going to send me for the recording?
I will. I absolutely will send you. I will send you a link for sure. And right now, you have to send me an autograph picture of your tennis pro career. I want to see that and hang it up and tell people. Not only do I know the former president, but I also know a tennis pro right here too as well. But love it.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Stay with us. But, to those out there, I want to just let you know, we're here on the first and third typically. And so I want to give you insight into what's coming up next. We want to thank Dr. Williams for his presence here today and the wealth of information as we've done. What we have coming up on just 2 days is 2 chefs in the dock. And what we're going to be doing is be cooking up really grains. And so we're going to have celebrity chef Cynthia Pien, who's chefing from the likes of Will Smith to professional athletes. And we have Chef Mommy as well, Heather Martin of the group Virtue, the gospel singing group Virtue. And then you have yours truly will be joining at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So join us here. And about 2 weeks after that, we're going to be joined by Dr. Michael Greger and the author of How Not to Die. So we're looking forward to that conversation as well, which will certainly augment the things that you've learned here today with Dr. Williams. Each and every week, the Conversations with the Doctors is brought to you by our affiliation with nonprofit sponsors, Healthy Heart Nation, which is seeking to make changes in the community. Our host is not here with us, Drs Batiste, and also Brian Hardy, who's behind the scenes, are leading this initiative to really transform our communities. Check them out at myhhn.org as well. And don't forget, I want you to like this broadcast, share it. There's someone out there whose life can be changed by you just sending them this message of hope from our Slay Food Conversation. Subscribe. Yes, thank you. Subscribe on the YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and we will see you on the 23rd at 7 p.m. You can find Dr. Williams at Rush University.